Later on, during that same year, another movie came into the scene shared a lot of similarities to James and the Giant Peach as a stop-motion animated feature based on one of the works of Roald Dahl. That film was Fantastic Mr. Fox. Inside a giant beech tree, there lives a family of foxes, which includes Mr. Fox himself, an ex-thief that stole stuff like chickens and apple ciders for survival. But after 12 years of raising his family, he decided to go with his instincts one last time, but ended up putting the entire animal community in danger. Now Mr. Fox and his crew of animals have to find a way to survive and fight against Bogus, Bunce, and Bean for the food. Way back when director Wes Anderson was just about 7 years old, his mom bought him his first ever book, Roald Dahl's Fantastic Mr. Fox. It was a moment that would change little Wes's life, as he and his brother have grown obsessed with the author, and he even looks up to him as one of his heroes. Today, that hasn't changed one bit. He even still owns that same old book. So later on, in 2004, Wes and Revolution Studios started making ideas to turn the children's novel into a feature film, along with Henry Selick as the animation director. Henry would be a perfect fit for the job considering his works on James and the Giant Peach, and that he already worked with Wes in The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou. However, in 2007, Revolution Studios shut down, which caused Henry to quit the project in order to work on Coraline. He was then replaced by Will Vinton Studios veteran Mark Gustafson. Also, it was the time when production officially began with 20th Century Fox in 3 Mills Studios in London, the same place where they made the Tim Burton stop-motion films. Originally, Jarvis Cocker was supposed to be an on-screen narrator, but they decided to take him out because it screwed with the mind of test audiences. But Jarvis is still in the movie as Petey. Also, Cate Blanchett was supposed to voice Mrs. Fox, but the negotiations didn't go so far, so they got Meryl Streep instead. When recording the dialogue for some of the actors, Wes brought them to places like a forest, an attic, a farm, underground, or whatever in order to capture the ambiance in the voices. But like I said, that's only with some of the actors. With Willem Dafoe and Meryl Streep, they had to record in a studio in Paris later on. By the way, this is actually George Clooney's first starring role in an animated film. His first time ever in an animated feature would be in South Park Bigger, Longer, and Uncut as Dr. Gwatch. This would also be the first film for British artist Hugo Guinness, who did the voice of Bunce. In order to capture the true sense of Roald Dahl in the movie, Wes visited and took tons of pictures at Gypsy House in Birminghamshire, England, the place where Dahl lived and his widow, Felicity, or Lissy for short, resides today. In fact, the movie took heavy inspiration to Gypsy House. The place where Mr. Fox lives is almost a recreation to Dahl's home, where the animators even made miniature pieces of furniture and appliances that can be found in the house. For the look of the film, it was inspired by the artwork of the illustrations of the original book made by Donald Chaffin. Also, to get the autumn feeling of the film, there are no greens or blues to be found, with the exception of Christopherson's shirt, to show that he's an outsider. In total, they made 535 puppets for the film. When making Mr. Fox himself, they based the wardrobe on the same brown suit that Wes Anderson wears, which makes watching behind-the-scenes videos quite funny seeing a real human Mr. Fox. Anyways, it took 7 months in order to perfect the first puppet of the main character. Afterwards, they made 102 Mr. Fox puppets that come in 17 different shapes and sizes. When working on the animation itself, the crew had to work on 29 different scenes simultaneously. As for references, Wes would go and act out all the scenes and shot himself through his iPhone while he's in Paris. To emphasize that this is a stop-motion movie, most of the film was shot at 12 frames per second. They would go in the full 24 frames per second whenever they need a scene that requires a more fast pace. Unlike the more recent stop-motion films like Paranorman or The Pirates, this movie uses 99% stop motion. Even the special effects are practical by using saran wrap as water, cotton as smoke, and soap for fire. The other 1% was the flooding scene, when they had to use CGI for the apple cider. There was actually one scene where they were really close to reshooting, which is Rat's death scene, because it looked like Rat was bleeding to death and Mr. Fox was sick enough to make him drink his own blood. But in actuality, it's just gunk from the sewers. For the song Bogus Bunsen Bean, they hired the American Cathedral in Paris Children's Choir to sing the description of the 3 characters from the book.
Here, listen to this.
Bogus Bunsen Bean, one fat, one short, one lean. These horrible groups are different in looks, but nonetheless equally mean.
The song was recorded at Abbey Road Studios in London, in the infamous Studio 2, the same place where the Beatles wrote almost all their songs. During the months before the release, there was a controversy regarding the time Wes Anderson actually spent in the studio, which is said to be very rare, with people comparing him to the Wizard of Oz and saying that he would mostly direct through emails from his flat in Paris. The actual situation wasn't really too big, but the controversy was mostly made through the exaggeration of the media. This is noted to be Wes's first family picture and the first stop-motion animated film for 20th Century Fox. Speaking of which, they originally wanted to make Mr. Fox the company mascot, but then they remembered that The Simpsons already made a joke about how dumb it sounds. The movie had its world premiere as the opening film for the 53rd London Film Festival, and then was released in theaters on November 13th, 2009, where it received great praise, saying that Fantastic Mr. Fox is a delightfully funny feast for the eyes, with multi-generational appeal, and it shows Wes Anderson has a knack for animation. However, as it did very well with critics, it can't be said the same about its box office performance, only getting about $46 million worldwide. This is mostly due to competition against more popular sequels like Twilight New Moon and Alvin and the Chipmunks The Squeakquel. Again, this was a flop because people rather want to watch Twilight and Alvin and the Chipmunks.
You f***ing people.
On the plus side, this film did get a better ending than those two. It did get several awards, including an Annie for Best Writing, and got nominated for many different awards for Best Animated Feature, including a BAFTA, a Golden Globe, an Annie, a Critics' Choice Award, and an Oscar along with Best Original Score, but lost to many of them to Pixar's Up. In 2011, Time magazine put the movie on its list of the 25 all-time best animated films. On February 18th, 2014, the movie was re-released on Blu-ray and DVD as part of the Criterion Collection, the legendary video distribution company that showcases important classic and contemporary films. Seriously, this is actually an extremely rare moment that an animated feature film would get to be on the Criterion Collection. The only ones that I could think of that are with Criterion are this and Akira, and the last one was released a long time ago. Now, some may argue that this is more because of Wes Anderson's involvement more than it is animation, but it's still a legendary moment nonetheless. In 2012, Frankenweenie wasn't the only stop-motion animated feature that contains elements of horror. There was also Laika's Paranorman. It's about a boy named Norman who is able to speak to the dead, but he's also a very unpopular kid, so nobody really believes him. After talking to his recently dead uncle, he had to perform a ritual to protect the town from a witch's curse that was set centuries ago. Of course, Norman screws up, which summons a horde of zombies. Now Norman and his friends have to stop the zombies and the curse in order to save the town. Now, about this town that I keep referring to, Blythe Hollow. The place is based on the old New England towns, Salem and Concord, so they could capture that sense of tourism, but also that saggy and scanty feeling. As for the names, it's a combination of the classic ghost stories like Noel Coward's Blythe's Spirit and Washington Irving's The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Also, if you notice in the design of the film, there are no straight lines to be found anywhere. Even in the design of the characters, they look a bit distorted. This may look weird, but that's exactly why the filmmakers did that. It's to give the movie that extra weirdness to help make it more unsettling. Back when Laika was making Coraline, one of the milestones it has, which I think I forgot to mention when I was talking about that film, I mean, with all the record it holds, they're kind of hard to track. But anyways, back on to what I was talking about. Coraline was the first ever stop-motion animated film to use a 3D printer in order to make the faces of the characters, which allows the team to make a lot more variation on the characters' expressions and the production to go much faster. With Paranorman, it's the first ever stop-motion animated film to use a colored 3D printer in order to make the faces, giving the advantage to give them some details like little freckles or wrinkles. It actually took the crew an entire year to make the toilet paper scene, figuring out how to design, sculpt, and animate the toilet paper so that they could also look like zombies. However, for the animators, the hardest thing to work on was actually Courtney, since none of the animators were ever a bubbly, popular teenage valley girl. But then comes Angry Aggie, whom from her technicality is possibly the ultimate animated character, using the main 3 animation mediums in order to bring her to life. There's of course stop motion for the character herself, computer for the special effects, and hand-drawn for the lightning bolts around her. This movie holds a milestone to have the first ever openly gay animated character in a family feature film. Not surprising that this does cause some controversy, which is pretty ironic since the moral of the movie is to not judge other people by who they are. By the way, I won't say who the character is because I don't want to spoil it for those who haven't seen it. Seriously, this movie actually leads up to quite possibly one of the most unexpected and funniest gay joke I have ever seen in an animated feature. When it was released on August 17th, 2012, it did great with critics saying that by being beautifully animated and solidly scripted, Paranorman will entertain and frighten older children while providing surprisingly thoughtful fare for their parents. As for the box office, it didn't do so well, only making $107 million worldwide, mostly because of tough competition with big blockbusters like The Expendables 2 and The Bourne Legacy. On the plus side, it did get some awards and plenty of nominations, including 2 Annies for Best Character Design and Best Character Animation, a BAFTA nomination, and an Oscar nomination for Best Animated Feature, along with the other stop-motion animated films of that year, like Tim Burton's Frankenweenie and Aardman's The Pirates. 2 years later, Laika decided to go outside the realm of horror done in their previous films and leaning more towards the fantasy of the Box Trolls, based on the novel Here Be Monsters by Alan Snow. Set in the Victorian era in Cheesebridge, there lived a bunch of peaceful creatures named Box Trolls that lived underground. On the surface, however, people believe that they are man-eating monsters, and one pest exterminator, Archibald Snatcher, is set to destroy them all in order to be a part of the high-ranked White Hats. But now it's up to a human raised by box trolls named Eggs and a girl named Winnie to stop Snatcher and reveal to everyone who the box trolls really are. When thinking of the language of the box trolls, the crew thought up of many different things, but they all didn't seem to fit in right. It wasn't until 2 of the voices of them, Dee Baker and Steve Blum, thought up of the perfect language for the creatures, consisting of animal noises and a bit of actual words thrown in. It's actually pretty easy to understand once you buy the Rosetta Stone Box Trolls edition, although the catch is try to remember the vocabulary. For the voice of Winnie, they got Elle Fanning, whom a few years before this, her older sister, Dakota Fanning, was the voice of the main character of another Laika film, Coraline. This actually marks the 6th film to feature the dynamic duo of Simon Pegg and Nick Frost, who were the voice of Herbert Trubshaw and Mr. Trout respectively, and also the 2nd animated feature where they were together, the first being The Adventures of Tintin where they played Thompson and Thompson.
Never fear, Tintin. The evidence is safe with us. Thompson, where are you? Oh, well, I'm already downstairs. Do try to keep up.
Funny enough, in this film, they actually never knew that one another was in this movie. When making the box trolls themselves, the animators thought it would be very easy. I mean, it's just a box with a head, arms, and feet, right? Oh boy, were they wrong, considering how they act like turtles and retract in their boxes. In order to accomplish that, they created shorter retractable heads and arms to switch every frame when the trolls get in their boxes. But that wasn't the only hard thing for them. The animators also had to figure out how to put in light in them so that their eyes are glowing. The solution to this is to create a new mechanism in the head of the trolls to have the light work with magnets, which is what they use to hold the faces and heads together. In the film, the most complicated face the animators ever had to work with is Snatcher's when he gets an allergic reaction. Since there were very few scenes where his allergies kick in hard, the faces made for him were all used once each for 1 or 2 frames. And since the whole design was so complicated, they had to bring in hand-drawn and computer references to see how he would talk with all those bouncing bulges. Also, because of the complexity of his design, the 3D printer could only make 12 faces an hour. And keep in mind, this machine can make 150 faces an hour. For the ballroom scene, the crew hired dancers to make reference shots to understand how they could execute it, especially with the ladies, where they created special dresses and mechanical legs to give them that little bounce while they waltz and make the dresses look floaty. Surprisingly enough, there are actually very few characters in that scene that are actually stop motion. The rest of the 50 to 60 extras are actually computer animated. If you're in the shoes of the stop motion puppets in that scene, that would be a freaky thought that a lot of people around you are actually digitized. Hey Eggs, you might need this pill. I think you need to check how deep the rabbit hole goes. But out of all the stop motion puppets Laika had made, none can yet be quite bigger than Snatcher's Mecha Drill. Made out of 600 detailed parts, this behemoth is almost as big as the animators themselves, and the way they could move it is with gears on the machine itself and with knobs on the computer for the bigger components. For some of the special effects, they would use rippled glass to achieve certain looks, whether they be reflections of water or fire when moved upwards with cheesecloth behind it. What's very interesting about the marketing of the box trolls is the fact that they would use the medium of stop motion as a major selling point of the film, which admittedly resulted in a pretty cool looking trailer.
They've got everybody here in their hands, they've got everybody here in their hands, they've got you and they've got me in their hands, they've got the whole world in their hands.
When it was released on September 26, 2014, it got some pretty good reviews saying that it may not be as good as Laika's previous films, but it's still an enjoyable movie. While it does have a weak story, the highly creative animation and some of the characters do make the experience satisfying to watch. For the box office, it did as well as Paranorman with more than $50 million domestically and $108 million worldwide. As for awards, it did get nominated for both an Oscar and Golden Globe for Best Animated Feature, but lost both to Disney's Big Hero 6 and DreamWorks' How to Train Your Dragon 2 respectively. However, it did get nominated for 13 Annie Awards, more than any other animated film during that year, and won 2 of them for Best Production Design and Best Voice Acting for Sir Ben Kingsley's performance as Snatcher.
His bones, but ain't the rest. Never be a dinner guest. A box to rolls. Oh, those box rolls. And that's the story of a Trapshaw kid. Ron Philip a Trapshaw did. You see box trolls, don't placate them. Catch them and exterminate them. Box trolls. Kill them. amongst rolls.